Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to God's glory and that of his kingdom. China is, of course, the most significant challenge we face to the country we love. It is a place that has been pursuing, under the Chinese Communist Party, a relentless, unrestricted war against our nation. And I think it's fair to say the free world more generally, which it seeks to dominate. There are few people in America who have studied longer, more thoughtfully, and more impactfully what the Chinese communists are up to than our first guest. His name is Steven Mosher. He was the first Western social scientist admitted into communist China as a result of some high level interventions, and as a result, had eyes on from fairly early on the nature of this barbaric transnational criminal organization, the Communist Party of China, and has been warning about it ever since. He is the author of a number of important books, including Bully of Asia, which pretty perfectly captures what the CCP is. He is a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China and was one of three expert panelists on a webinar that we did last week that I'm anxious to talk a little bit further with Steve Mosher about. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome back to Securing America.
Well, it's good to be here with you again, Frank.
You and Dr. Bradley Thayer and Captain Jim Fennell did a three-part harmony that was extraordinarily powerful about the degree to which we now have reason to believe the Chinese Communist Party is no longer content with engaging in so-called unrestricted, non-kinetic warfare against us, but is now ready to go into the more traditional, violent phase of warfare. Perhaps immediately focused on Taiwan, but in the expert opinion of all three of you, very probably involving attacks against American persons, assets, and perhaps territory as well. Talk us through the nature of this threat as you see it at the moment, Steve Mosher.
Well, what has been going on in China since really before the Russian invasion of Ukraine is that the Chinese Communist Party leaders, led, of course, by the supreme leader, Xi Jinping, have been doing detailed strategic, operational, and tactical planning for an invasion of Taiwan. So I think at one level, they see the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where Russia is simply grinding down the Ukrainian forces and will, I think, at the end of the day, barring major intervention from NATO, seize as much Ukrainian territory as it desires to. While that is going on, China has been watching and engaging the reaction of the West at the same time that it has been holding meetings, not at the national level necessarily, but at the provincial level to begin planning for what it calls a people's war. Now, the people's war during the Chinese Civil War was a war in which every person in the red areas, in the communist base areas, was considered to be a resource by Chairman Mao Zedong and by the Red Army. People were forced to serve the purposes of the Communist Party, and women were forced out of the home into the fields, children were forced to labor, and all men were enlisted in the army. Every resource in the red base areas was confiscated, expropriated by the Communist Party. The same thing is happening today in China. Every resource, not just the military resources that we all count, the bean counters count the planes and the tanks and the ships and so forth that have military uses, obviously, that are part of the People's Liberation Army. They're enlisting in this future invasion of Taiwan private commercial vessels, fishing vessels, roll off ships that carry normally car ferries to get across the Taiwan Strait. So very, very detailed planning for a people's war in the hope, I think, of just while we're distracted with Ukraine, moving into Taiwan in a major way, in an
Yeah.
overwhelming way.
One of the things that I was so impressed by was your evaluation of a video from Guangdong province, not the one most immediately in proximity to Taiwan, but a very important one of China, of course. And as I understand it, you did some of your research in Guangdong province. Talk a little bit about this video that purports to be a planning session, as you say, at the provincial level, in which the military and top party cadre are preparing to move from what they call normal to war.
Well, what you have here is a detailed planning meeting. It was leaked out of China. Some people questioned its authenticity. I listened to it, Frank, in Chinese. Uh, it has, to me, the ring of truth. It is a meeting not just filled with communist exhortations and slogans like a typical political meeting that has been held in China every day for the last 70 years. This was very detailed planning between the senior military leadership of the southern region, the Southern Military Command of China, and the Guangdong provincial party officials. And basically, the military was telling the party leaders what they would need from the commercial sector of the economy, from the nominally private sector of the economy when war broke out. And we're talking about identifying factories in Guangdong province that make drones and ensuring that the workers who are making those drones, which can be used to attack Taiwan, would stay on the factory floor in the event of an outbreak by locking them in the factories, forcing them to work long hours, not allowing them to go home at night, ensuring what they called worker stability. The same thing in other factories making ships. The same thing on with regard to the merchant vessels. They were talking in such detailed terms that they identified specific airports, specific railroads, specific railroad cars, specific planes, and, for example, 62 roll on, roll off ships, normally that are used to transport automobiles from China, in and out of China to other countries, can be virtually overnight transformed into a carrier of an armored brigade that would help an armored brigade get across the Taiwan Straits. 62 of those roll on, roll off ships, ro ships, they're called, were
Yes.
being expropriated by the Guangdong provincial government and put immediately at the disposal of the military whenever the military asked for it, whenever the go order
Yeah.
was given by Xi Jinping.
This is, I guess, what they call the civil military fusion that is part and parcel of Chinese doctrine. And what you've described, Steve Mosher, is essentially not just an abstraction. This is detailed planning that is being executed as we speak. And as I understand it, the marching orders from Beijing to this province and presumably the others is to be prepared to act on these plans within something like 90 days. So this is potentially a very, very imminent problem indeed. We have to take a brief break. When we come back, Steve Mosher, I want to come back to something that you touched on there a moment ago, essentially slave labor and the extent to which it is not just something that factory workers in the military sector would be subjected to, but that it is endemic, and particularly in the Uyghur areas of China. We'll talk with Steven Mosher about all of this and much more, and what it means for us and the idea of maintaining the peace in the Western Pacific. That and more straight ahead.